Welcome to the Friday vlog.
Welcome to the Friday vlog.
And today we wanted to talk about what we're seeing around anger being a coping mechanism.
Ooh. We're going to talk about that. You going to kick things off?
Well, I thought you had the insight.
Oh, I did have a bit of an insight earlier.
You had an insight mid-webinar that we were presenting.
I did. It felt like it became a sort of personal therapy session for me.
No.
No, not necessarily a bad thing. I actually got a lot out of it. But I wonder how other people felt viewing it. I hope it was of benefit.
I hope so too.
But it was very beneficial for me because I think that I got to see real time while you were talking about how we have these coping mechanisms, and that these coping mechanisms can be a total blind spot. And we use an example of me getting upset on... Go ahead.
I was going to say we can set some context. So basically what we were talking about in the webinar is how there's certain coping mechanisms that are really obvious. Like if somebody uses drinking as a coping mechanism, I think we're all pretty much clear that, oh yeah, that's a coping mechanism. But we have behaviors of interaction that can also be coping mechanisms that are designed on some level to protect us from the pain and suffering we're feeling inside. And so anger was an example of one of those that people don't necessarily see it as a coping mechanism.
And to give that a little bit more clarification, because I guess I just jumped in, is that those coping mechanisms are really born out of a distance that we create for ourselves between ourselves and our essential nature. And
we feel disconnected at times.
We feel disconnected, and often that's a blind spot. But I think what was interesting for me this morning in that webinar is I suddenly realized that anger has been something that I've used over the years as a coping mechanism. I would never have even have thought of my anger and my reactivity being a coping mechanism, when in actual fact all along that's exactly what it has been. And that for me, the way that it really becomes abundantly clear to me that it is a coping mechanism is that my anger is a way that I drown out the noise of my egoic conceptual mind that's really struggling with pain, and that the pain is something that I don't want to feel or experience. And so all of the noise around that pain is something that I drown out with anger. It's almost like, I guess I equated it to be something like, I guess in the field of battle, I imagine that the captains would then instruct their troops to sort of, summon up some anger to defeat the enemy. The enemy?
Enemy.
and an enema.
An enemy.
An enemy.
An enema.
Something. I was thinking if I see an enemy and then it turned up to something you stick up your bottom. I'm a little bit doolally at this point, I have to say. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is don't stick it up your bottom. But that's not something that would be helpful in the field of a battle, in battlefield. But in actual fact, using anger in that situation is helpful because you summon up a certain amount of distance from you and your fear. So I'm saying in this situation, over the years, I've been able to create a certain amount of distance between me and my pain, whatever that may be, by summoning up this anger. That's become my habitual pattern of play when I'm having to confront that pain or not confronting that pain. Mm-hmm. And it's become almost like this subconscious thing. So it was really amazing to me to think that that was a coping mechanism, and that I'm blindly kind of like reacting to certain situations as a coping mechanism because I don't want to feel that pain. Maybe that's obvious to most people, but that's been a blind spot to me for many years. So I think that was kind of an insight. Maybe I'm just the sort of remedial student on this, but for me, I kind of saw it today in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I think all humans have their blind spots around their coping mechanisms, and that's why we're talking about it as an invitation for all of us to recognize that we all have different ways that are conscious and unconscious of avoiding emotional pain. Like for me, my anger shows up in the form of criticism or some kind of hostility. And whenever that's present, that's me going towards a coping mechanism rather than simply being present to the feeling that I'm experiencing in the moment. And the feeling of hurt, the feeling of pain, the feeling of emotional suffering, as you're saying, Angus, is always an indicator that we've lost touch with ourselves. And it's really painful when we lose touch with ourselves. So sometimes we can be with that pain and let it move through us, and then we come back into our more settled state. Other times we quickly go into reactivity without even noticing it. And so we thought it would be helpful to just expand the idea of what coping mechanisms are to include experiences like expressing anger, expressing criticism, because these are the kinds of experiences that we see come up in relationships, and people think it's a relationship problem, when really what they're dealing with are their own coping mechanisms for their own pain that are decreasing and diminishing rapport in the relationship.
Exactly. I definitely couldn't have said it any better.
Do you want to add
At this
anything?
point, without talking about bottoms or anemones.
Stop it.
or the risk of talking about bottoms and anemones.
Anemones.
And enemies. And enemies.
Well, hopefully this is helpful to have more space for your feeling state so that those behaviors are less needed, and to know that you're safe with whatever feelings are arising within you, and that really when we're suffering, ultimately what we need is our own self-love and compassion. And if that's the place that we start, then we're going to have a whole lot more room to allow ourselves to feel what's there, but then to stabilize without creating more suffering along the way for ourselves and others.
Yeah, what she said.
Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.